I thought I'd grown used to his threatening glares, until that night, when I stood shielding my little brother and heard the faint click from our neighbor's doorbell camera. He thought the dark corner of the yard was perfect cover. He didn't know the shadow across the fence was holding up a phone, and another set of eyes was watching from the community camera. I'd sworn no one would touch my brother. I never imagined that promise would bring down an entire construction empire, right in front of everyone. My name is Mara Ellison, and I never planned to stay in Maple Ridge longer than necessary. 3 months, maybe 4. Just enough time to help Mom recover from her hip surgery and make sure Leo was settling into sophomore year. I could handle my coordinator duties at Haven Point Children's Network remotely 3 days a week. Simple arrangement, clean exit strategy. That was before I truly understood what kind of man Grant Caro was. The house at the end of Sycamore Drive looked perfect from the outside. Colonial style with fresh white paint, manicured lawn, the American dream wrapped in vinyl siding. Grant had made sure of that. Image was everything for the owner of Ridgeline Build and Supply, the company that had poured half the foundations in North Cascadia over the past decade. "Your mother's lucky to have you back," Grant said that first evening, not looking up from his tablet where he was reviewing blueprints. We were sitting around the dinner table, Mom's homemade lasagna getting cold while he scrolled through construction documents. Most kids would have just hired a nurse. "Family takes care of family," I replied, catching Leo's eye across the table. My 15-year-old brother gave me the slightest smile, the kind that said he was glad I was there. He'd grown 3 inches since Christmas, all gangly limbs and careful movements, like he was trying not to take up too much space in his own home. Grant finally looked up, his gray eyes scanning me with the same calculating expression he probably used to assess load-bearing walls. "Family, right, though technically, you're not—" "Grant." Mom's voice was soft but firm, her hand reaching across to touch his wrist. Even 2 weeks post-surgery, she moved with the practiced grace of someone who'd learned to navigate around sharp edges. He smiled then, the contractor's smile he wore for city planning meetings. "Just saying, Elaine, it's generous. Mara has her own life in the city. Important work with those troubled kids." "They're not troubled," I said evenly. "They're in crisis. There's a difference." Sure. He waved his hand dismissively. "Point is, you're here now. Maybe you'll learn something about real business while you're at it. Leo's been spending time at the warehouse. Haven't you, son?" Leo shifted in his seat. "Just twice, after school. Boy needs to understand how things actually get built in this world. Not everyone can afford to work for nonprofits." Grant's tone carried that particular brand of condescension I remembered from holiday dinners, the kind that made charity sound like a character flaw. After dinner, I helped Mom to her room while Grant disappeared into his home office to take calls about the new Riverside Bridge project he'd been crowing about for weeks. Leo was loading the dishwasher when I came back down, moving with the quiet efficiency of someone who'd learned the exact way things needed to be done. "You okay?" I asked, picking up a dish towel. "Yeah, it's just different when he's home." Leo handed me a plate. "He's been around more since the Riverside contract. Says it's a game changer. $20 million in federal infrastructure money." Through the kitchen window, I noticed movement across the street. A woman was adjusting what looked like a new security camera on her porch, angling it toward the street. She caught me looking and waved. "That's Mrs. Ortiz," Leo said. "She moved in last month. Dad thinks she's paranoid with all the cameras." "Grant's not your dad," I reminded him gently. "I know, he just likes when I call him that in public." The next morning, I was setting up my laptop in the sunroom when Mrs. Ortiz appeared at the door with a casserole dish. "Val Ortiz," she said, extending a hand after I'd managed the door. Mid-60s, sharp eyes behind designer glasses, wearing a cardigan that probably cost more than my monthly car payment. "Thought your mother might appreciate some food she didn't have to cook." "That's kind of you. I'm Mara, Elaine's daughter. The one who works with children. Your mother's mentioned you." She glanced around the foyer with the kind of attention to detail that seemed habitual. "I'm a widow myself, retired. Used to investigate insurance claims, so I'm afraid I notice everything. Occupational hazard. She pointed to a discreet sign in her yard I hadn't noticed before. Neighborhood Watch Coordinator. The HOA loves that I volunteered, she said with a wry smile. Gives them someone to blame when residents complain about packages being stolen. Though between you and me, the new camera system should help with that. HD quality, cloud storage, motion activation, covers my whole property line and then some. Something in her tone made me think she wasn't just making small talk, but before I could respond, Grant's truck roared into the driveway, music blaring. He cut the engine and emerged in his Ridgeline Polo, every inch the successful contractor. Mrs. Ortiz, he called out with his meeting smile. Keeping the neighborhood safe? Just being neighborly, Mr. Caro. Her smile was pleasant, professional. How's the bridge project? Ahead of schedule. Amazing what happens when you have the right connections at City Hall. He winked, already heading inside. Mara, tell your mother I'll be late tonight. Council meeting. After he left, Mrs. Ortiz lingered a moment. Your brother seems like a good kid. Quiet. I see him waiting for the bus some mornings when your stepfather's truck is already gone. Grant likes his early meetings, I said carefully. I'm sure he does. She adjusted her glasses. Well, if you ever need anything, or if your mother does, I'm right across the street. The cameras are always on. The cracks started showing on a Thursday afternoon. I was working from the dining room, coordinating emergency placements for Haven Point, when Grant barged in with a manila folder thick as a brick. Leo, he bellowed up the stairs. Get down here, now! My brother appeared in the doorway, backpack still on his shoulder. I just got home from school. Perfect timing. You're coming to the warehouse. Tommy called in sick, and I need someone to help with inventory. Grant slapped the folder on the table, and several invoices spilled out. Northbridge Aggregates. The letterhead read, multiple dates, overlapping entries. I have coding club tomorrow, Leo said quietly. The summer camp application is due. Summer camp? Grant's laugh was sharp. You want to spend July sitting in front of a computer when you could be learning actual skills, making real money? The camp has scholarships, I interjected, closing my laptop. Full ride for students who qualify. Leo's already through the first round. Grant's jaw tightened. I wasn't talking to you. The acceptance rate is 8%, Leo added, finding his voice. If I get in, it includes mentorship with software engineers, real ones, from major companies. Software, Grant shook his head. Your generation thinks everything happens on screens. You know what built this house? Concrete and sweat. You know what pays for your fancy computer? Actual construction contracts. He grabbed the scattered invoices, shoving them back in the folder with unnecessary force. One fluttered to the floor near my feet. I glimpsed columns of numbers that didn't quite align, quantities that seemed to repeat in patterns. The camp orientation is mandatory, I said, picking up the paper and handing it back. If Leo misses it, he loses his spot. Grant snatched the invoice from my hand. Fine, let him play with his computers. But when he's 30 and still living in someone's basement, debugging code for pennies, don't come crying to me about opportunities. After he stormed out, Leo slumped in a chair. Thanks. You're going to that camp, I told him. I don't care what Grant says. That evening, while Grant was at another council meeting, I found myself staring at his home office door. It was never locked. Grant was too arrogant to think anyone would dare snoop. His laptop sat open on the desk, QuickBooks still running. I wasn't planning to look. I was just closing the door when I noticed the screen. 2 different payroll windows side by side. Same employee names, different numbers, the kind of thing that could mean simple error or something else entirely. Finding everything okay? I spun around. Mom stood in the hallway, leaning on her walker. Just closing the door, the light was bothering my eyes. She nodded slowly. Grant's very particular about his office, his business. Mom? He's a good provider, Mara. He has his ways, but he takes care of us. The words sounded rehearsed, like she'd said them to herself many times. The next day, Mrs. Ortiz caught me checking the mail. "Beautiful morning," she said, though her expression suggested she had more on her mind. "Say, I've been meaning to ask, do you know if Ridgeline did the Maple Heights development? The one where those foundations cracked after 6 months?" "I wouldn't know," I said carefully. "Of course not. It's just, I still have friends in the insurance business. They mention patterns sometimes. Companies that file claims with interesting timing. Materials that appear on multiple invoices." She adjusted her glasses. "Not that I'm suggesting anything, just curious about local construction, for the Neighborhood Watch newsletter." That afternoon, while Grant was at the warehouse, I found myself back at the dining room table with Leo's laptop, researching public construction contracts. Ridgeline Build and Supply had won an impressive number of bids, always just under the threshold that would trigger enhanced oversight, always with the same city supervisor's signature. "What are you doing?" Leo asked, looking over my shoulder. "Research for work," I lied. He squinted at the screen. "That's Dad's, Grant's company. Just comparing construction costs. Haven Point is looking at building a new shelter." Leo was quiet for a moment. "He keeps 2 sets of books," he said suddenly. "I saw them at the warehouse, one for the banks, one for, I don't know. He said it was normal, said everyone does it." "Leo, I'm not stupid. Mara, I know something's off. The way he brags about his connections, the cash payments to day laborers, the way he had me sign papers as a junior employee even though I've only been there twice." His voice dropped. "Mom knows too. She just pretends not to." Through the window, I watched Mrs. Ortiz water her garden, her new camera system gleaming in the afternoon sun. She looked up, caught my eye, and nodded slightly, a recognition of something unspoken but understood. That night, Grant came home jubilant, whiskey already on his breath. "Riverside Bridge is a lock," he announced. 20 million reasons to celebrate. Nobody builds like Ridgeline." "Congratulations," Mom said softly. "Damn right. Congratulations. This is what real success looks like. Leo, not summer camps, not nonprofits, real money, real power." He pulled out his phone, scrolling through photos of construction sites. "Posted this earlier. Already got 100 likes. Image matters in this business. People need to see you winning." I glanced at his phone screen. In the background of one photo, clear as day, was a truck license plate and a partial view of what looked like delivery logs. "That's quite an operation," I said. Grant's smile was all teeth. "You have no idea." The night it happened, the air was thick with humidity and unspoken tensions. Grant had been drinking since 5, celebrating another secured contract with his City Hall buddies over the phone. Mom had retreated to her room with a migraine. Leo and I were on the back porch, him showing me his coding project on his laptop. That's when the dog appeared, a golden retriever mix, collar but no tags, whimpering at our gate. "Hey, buddy," Leo said softly, approaching slowly. "You lost?" The dog cowered but let Leo pet him, tail wagging tentatively. "He's scared. Maybe we should—" "Get that mutt out of here." Grant's voice cut through the evening air. He stood in the doorway, beer bottle in hand, face flushed. "Last thing we need is some flea bag making noise." "He's just lost," Leo said, his hand still on the dog's head. "I can walk him around, find his owner." I said get rid of it. Grant stepped onto the porch, his work boots heavy on the wood. "Now." The dog, sensing danger, pressed against Leo's leg. My brother stood up, putting himself between Grant and the animal. "Just let me take him to Mrs. Ortiz. She knows everyone in the neighborhood." "You don't listen, do you?" Grant moved forward, his boot pulling back in a kicking motion toward the dog. "No!" Leo grabbed the dog's collar, pulling him away. That's when everything shifted. Grant's face contorted with rage. "You little—" His hand went up, moving toward Leo. I moved without thinking, stepping between them, my back to my brother. Don't. The impact came fast. Grant's palm against my cheek, the force sending me stumbling but not falling. I kept my stance, kept Leo behind me, my hand reaching back to make sure he stayed there. "You hit me," I said, loud enough for the world to hear. "You just hit me." Grant's eyes widened slightly, some recognition of what he'd done flickering through the alcohol haze, but his voice stayed hard. "You need to learn respect, both of you." That's when I heard it. The soft click from across the street. Mrs. Ortiz's doorbell camera, motion activated, and in the corner of my eye, I caught the red recording light from the HOA's new community camera mounted on the street lamp. "Get inside," Grant growled. "Now." "Leo, take the dog to Mrs. Ortiz," I said calmly, my cheek stinging. "I'll handle this." "Mara." "Go." Leo slipped past us with the dog. Running across the street, I saw Mrs. Ortiz's door open before he even knocked, saw her usher him inside quickly, her phone already in her hand. Grant grabbed my arm. "You think you're smart? You think you can come into my house?" "Let go." I kept my voice steady, clear. "The cameras are recording. The whole neighborhood can see." He released me, looking around suddenly, noticing the camera positions for perhaps the first time. "You're making a big mistake." "No," I said, pulling out my phone. "You did that." I dialed 911, keeping my eyes on him. "I need to report an assault." While we waited for the police, I took photos of my face in the porch light, the red mark already darkening to purple. Grant paced, muttering about misunderstandings, about family disputes, about how I was overreacting. 2 officers arrived within 15 minutes. Mrs. Ortiz met them in the driveway. Leo still at her house. "Officers, I have video footage you need to see." "This is a private family matter," Grant started, but the younger officer cut him off. "Sir, we'll need to speak with everyone separately." I gave my statement clearly, showed them the photos, pointed out the camera positions. Mrs. Ortiz pulled up the footage on her phone. Crystal clear HD video of Grant striking me, audio of the entire confrontation. "There's also the HOA camera," she added helpfully. "I have the security company's contact information." Mom emerged then, walker scraping against the concrete, face pale. "What's happening?" "Ma'am, we're going to need to take your husband to the station," the older officer said. Grant's facade finally cracked. "This is insane. It was barely a touch. Tell them, Elaine." Mom looked at me, at the mark on my face, at the officers, at Grant. "I didn't see what happened," she said quietly. "I was in my room." They arrested him that night. I filed for an emergency protective order before the courthouse closed, the advocate at the station helping with the paperwork. Leo stayed with Mrs. Ortiz until Grant was gone, then came home to find Mom crying at the kitchen table. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm so sorry." "It's not your fault," I said, though part of me wondered how long she'd been looking away. Leo sat down beside her. "Mara protected me. She always does. The protective order will keep him away temporarily." I explained, "We need to figure out next steps." "He'll be back," Mom said. "He'll make bail by morning, his lawyers, his connections." "Let him try," I said, feeling something cold and determined settling in my chest. "Mrs. Ortiz has the video, the police have my statement and photos, and that's just the beginning." My phone buzzed. A text from Mrs. Ortiz. "The video is backed up in 3 places. Also, you might want to know, that truck in Grant's construction photos? I ran the plates through an old contact. Interesting registration history. We should talk." Leo looked at me. "What are you going to do?" "What I do best," I said, thinking of all those cases at Haven Point, all those children I'd helped protect through proper documentation and legal channels. Build a case he can't demolish. Through the window, I could see Mrs. Ortiz's house, her cameras standing sentinel in the darkness. Grant thought the shadows would hide him. He was wrong. Everyone was watching now. Grant made bail the next morning, just as Mom predicted. By afternoon, his lawyer was already spinning stories about misunderstandings and family stress, but I wasn't interested in his narrative anymore. I had work to do. Mrs. Ortiz invited me over for coffee 2 days later. Her house was immaculate, cream furniture, organized filing systems visible through her office door, and a wall of monitors showing feeds from her security cameras. "I kept copies of everything," she said, handing me a USB drive. "The assault video, plus some interesting footage from the past month. Your stepfather has quite a few late-night deliveries." She pulled up a folder on her laptop. "That truck license you saw in his photo? It's registered to a shell company that technically doesn't exist anymore, but it's still making deliveries to Ridgeline Warehouse." "How do you know all this?" 25 years in insurance investigation. You learn to spot patterns. Companies like Ridgeline, they're usually running multiple schemes: insurance fraud, tax evasion, labor violations. She adjusted her glasses. "I've been watching since I moved in. Call it a retirement hobby." She showed me another file, screenshots from Grant's social media, delivery logs she'd captured on camera, even photos of workers being paid in cash behind the warehouse. "There's someone you should meet," she continued. "Cade Willis, independent journalist, specializes in construction corruption. He's been tracking suspicious infrastructure contracts across North Cascadia for 2 years. Cade met us at a coffee shop downtown that afternoon, mid-30s, wearing a blazer that had seen better days, carrying a laptop covered in investigative journalism stickers. "Ridgeline Build and Supply," he said, pulling up files before we'd even ordered. "I've been circling them for months, always just below the radar, always the same city supervisor signing off, but I haven't had an inside source." "I'm not a source," I clarified. "I'm a victim pursuing legal remedies. Even better, victims have standing." He showed me public records, bid documents, inspection reports, permit applications. "Look at these numbers. Same materials, quantities appearing across different projects. Same cost estimates down to the penny. Either Grant Caro is psychic or he's rigging the bids." "What would you need to publish?" Mrs. Ortiz asked. "Documentation, real evidence of fraud, not just suspicious patterns." Cade looked at me. "You lived in that house. You must have seen something." I thought about Grant's home office, the dual payroll windows, the scattered invoices. I may have observed some irregularities, but I'd need to verify them properly. That evening, while reviewing the protective order paperwork at home, I remembered something: Grant's laptop. He'd been so proud of his cloud backup system, bragging about how he could access everything from anywhere. He'd even used my old tablet once to pull up blueprints, saving his login credentials. The tablet was still in my room. I opened it, and there they were: saved passwords for his QuickBooks, his email, his file storage, legal gray area, maybe. But I was listed as a household member on several of his business insurance policies, documents I'd had to sign when I moved in for emergency purposes. He'd said, "The financial records were a goldmine of impropriety, double billing, phantom employees, materials charged to the city that ended up at private job sites. One folder labeled consulting fees showed regular transfers to an LLC that, according to public records, didn't exist." I started organizing everything methodically, the way I'd learned at Haven Point: clear chains of evidence, timestamps, cross-references. Each document told part of the story. Together, they painted a picture of systematic fraud. "Mom's asking for you," Leo said from my doorway. I found her in the living room, Grant's attorney's business card in her hand. "He wants to come by tomorrow, to talk. His lawyer says if we drop the protective order, Grant will agree to counseling." "Counseling," I repeated flatly. "He says Grant's under stress from the business. The Riverside Bridge project is so important." "Mom, he's defrauding the city. That bridge? He's probably cutting corners on it, too." She shook her head. "You don't understand how business works. Honey, everyone does things like that. It's how you stay competitive." No, I said firmly. It's how people get killed when bridges collapse. It's how workers get hurt when safety equipment isn't really purchased. It's how taxpayers fund someone's mansion while schools fall apart. Leo spoke up from the hallway. Mom, he hit Mara. On camera. That's not stress. That's who he is. That night, I sent encrypted files to Cade Willis. Public documents only. Nothing that could be challenged in court, but enough for him to start pulling threads. Mrs. Ortiz texted me. State Inspector General's office has an anonymous tip line. They take frauds seriously, especially on federal infrastructure money. Just saying. I looked at the USB drive she'd given me, at my tablet full of Grant's records, at the bruise fading on my cheek. Grant had built his empire on believing no one was watching, that his connections would protect him, that his family would stay silent. He was about to learn how wrong he was. I opened my laptop and started typing. To whom it may concern, I wish to report suspected fraud in the Riverside Bridge construction project. The corruption ran deeper than even I'd imagined, but I'd learned something at Haven Point. The bigger they build their houses of cards, the more spectacular the collapse. The temporary protective order hearing was set for the following week. Grant showed up with 2 lawyers in suits that cost more than most people's cars. I had a volunteer attorney from Haven Point's legal network, Sarah Hendricks, who usually handled custody cases but knew her way around protective orders. Your Honor, Grant's lead attorney began, this is simply a family misunderstanding blown out of proportion. Mr. Caro is a pillar of the community, a successful businessman who provides for his family. Who struck me? I interrupted. On camera. Sarah presented the video evidence from Mrs. Ortiz's doorbell camera and the HOA security footage. The judge watched Grant's hand connect with my face, watched me stumble, watched Leo run with the dog. The audio was crystal clear. Every threat, every word. Mr. Caro, the judge said, I'm granting the protective order for 6 months. You are to stay 500 feet away from Miss Ellison and have no contact except through attorneys. What about my home? Grant demanded. My wife? Miss Ellison's mother was not the victim of assault. She's free to make her own choices. However, I understand there's a minor child in the home. My brother, I said. Leo, he's 15. The judge looked at Leo, who was sitting in the gallery with Mrs. Ortiz. Young man, do you feel safe in the home with Mr. Caro? Leo stood up. I want to stay with my sister and my mom, not him. Then Mr. Caro will need to find alternative accommodation while the protective order is in effect. Grant's face turned purple. This is my house. I pay the mortgage. And you're free to continue doing so, the judge said dryly, from elsewhere. Outside the courthouse, Grant cornered his lawyers, gesticulating wildly. Mom stood by the car, looking lost, but something had shifted in her expression when she saw that video played in court. The myth of the stressed businessman finally cracking. That afternoon, Grant did exactly what I expected. He took to social media, photos of him at construction sites, shaking hands with city officials, captions about persecution and false accusations, and standing strong for American business values. One photo showed him at the Riverside Bridge site, hard hat gleaming, pointing at blueprints, in the background, clear as day, truck license plates, delivery manifests on a clipboard, even a partial view of a laptop screen showing spreadsheets. Cade Willis texted me immediately. He just gave us evidence. That truck in the background? It's supposed to be decommissioned. Those manifests? Different from what was filed with the city. I forwarded the photos to my anonymous contact at the Inspector General's office, adding notes about the discrepancies. Then I helped Mom and Leo pack Grant's things into boxes for his lawyer to collect. In his home office, I found more interesting documents, sticky notes with payment amounts that matched the phantom LLC transfers, business cards for companies that didn't exist in any registry. Are you documenting everything? Mom asked from the doorway. Someone should have, a long time ago. She was quiet for a moment. I knew something was wrong. The cash he'd bring home, The way he'd brag about working the system, I thought it was normal business. It's not normal. It's fraud. 2 days later, while Grant was posting pictures from a business dinner with city council members, the Inspector General's office made their move. Cade had given me a heads up. His sources said they'd been building a case for months, and my complaint had provided the final pieces. The inspection at the Riverside Bridge site was supposed to be routine. Grant even posted about it. Another perfect review coming. Ridgeline quality speaks for itself. It didn't go as planned. Inspectors found concrete that hadn't cured properly, rebar spacing that violated code, and materials that didn't match purchase orders. They immediately expanded their investigation to the warehouse, where they discovered the 2 sets of books I'd flagged, one for taxes, one for reality. Grant tried damage control, calling an emergency meeting with his investors, but Cade's article dropped that evening. Federal investigation launched into Ridgeline Build and Supply. Sources cite systematic fraud in infrastructure projects. The article was careful, factual, citing only public records and sources familiar with the investigation, but the photo Cade had chosen was perfect. Grant at a ribbon cutting, his smile all teeth, with a construction site in the background where, if you looked closely, you could see corners being cut. He's panicking. Misses. Ortiz told me over the fence that evening. 3 cars at his hotel this afternoon. Lawyers. Probably. Grant's social media went silent for exactly 2 hours. Then came the post. Fake news media attacking successful American business. This is what happens when you stand up to the establishment. Ridgeline will be vindicated. But his bravado was cracking. The next morning, 2 more inspectors showed up at the warehouse with federal badges. By afternoon, local news had picked up the story. By evening, Grant's biggest investor had released a statement reviewing their relationship with Ridgeline Build and Supply. Leo watched the news coverage from the couch, his laptop open to his coding project, the one Grant had mocked. He always said image was everything. He observed quietly. He was right about that, I replied, watching Grant's empire begin its public collapse. He just never realized his image was built on sand. Mom stood behind us, her hand on Leo's shoulder. For the first time since Grant's arrest, she looked like she could breathe. The summer camp accepted me, Leo said suddenly, showing us the email. Full scholarship. They said my application showed exceptional problem-solving skills and ethical thinking. I hugged him. You're going, no matter what Grant says. Grant doesn't get a say anymore, Mom said quietly. It was the first time she'd stood up to him, even in his absence. That night, I compiled everything for the next phase. Financial records, inspection reports, Cade's investigation notes. Grant thought he'd lost a protective order hearing. He had no idea that was just the opening move. The federal audit hit Ridgeline like a wrecking ball in slow motion. Every day brought new revelations, each one meticulously documented by investigators who knew exactly where to look, thanks to the roadmap I'd provided. Grant's lawyers tried to block the audit, claiming harassment and overreach. But when inspectors found asphalt mixed at 60% of the required density on a school parking lot project, even his legal team couldn't spin it away. They're testing core samples from 5 years of projects, Cade told me over coffee. Every single one shows materials below spec. The Riverside Bridge alone has 17 safety violations. Misses. Ortiz had been busy too. Her insurance contacts had uncovered a pattern of claims filed by Ridgeline. Water damage at sites that had no reported rain. Equipment theft from locations with no police reports. Worker injuries for employees who didn't exist. Classic triple dipping, she explained, showing me the data she'd compiled. Bill the client for premium materials, use substandard ones, then file insurance claims for fake problems to get paid a third time. The investigation escalated when they found the ghost employees. 23 names on payroll who'd never set foot on a job site. Their wages funneled through the phantom LLC I'd identified. The federal prosecutor's office upgraded the case from civil to criminal fraud. Grant, desperate now, called for an emergency shareholder meeting at the Maple Ridge Marriott. He needed to reassure investors. Stop the bleeding. What he didn't know was that Sarah Hendricks, my volunteer attorney, had filed a motion allowing me to attend as an affected party. My status as a documented victim of assault by the CEO, combined with my mother's community property interest in Ridgeline, gave me standing. "You want to walk into his meeting?" Mom asked, incredulous. "I want him to face the truth in front of everyone who enabled him." The meeting was scheduled for Friday afternoon. By Thursday night, I had everything ready: financial forensics from the federal audit, insurance fraud documentation from Mrs. Ortiz, Cade's investigation files, and something new: sworn affidavits from 3 former Ridgeline employees about cash payments and safety violations they'd been ordered to ignore. But the real weapon came from an unexpected source. Leo had been quiet all week, working on something at his computer. That Thursday night, he showed me what he'd built: a searchable database cross-referencing every public record related to Ridgeline projects with inspection reports and insurance claims. "I scraped it all from public sites," he said. "It's all legal, all documented. Look at this pattern." The visualization was damning. Every project with a cost overrun had a matching insurance claim. Every failed inspection was followed by a city permit approved by the same supervisor. The corruption wasn't just systematic, it was algorithmic. "Can you put this in a presentation?" I asked. Already did. 15 slides, all sourced. Friday came gray and humid. I dressed carefully: professional blazer, the kind I wore for court appearances at Haven Point. Sarah met me in the hotel lobby, along with an unexpected addition: a representative from the State Attorney General's office. "We're very interested in what transpires here today," he said simply. The conference room was full of middle-aged men in expensive suits, all wearing the same worried expression. Grant stood at the podium. His usual commanding presence diminished. He looked older, grayer, his designer suit not quite hiding the stress weight he'd gained. "Gentlemen," he began, "these allegations are nothing but—" "Mr. Caro," Sarah interrupted. "Miss Ellison has standing to present relevant information to the shareholders." Grant's face went white when he saw me. "You can't be here. There's a protective order, which allows for necessary legal proceedings." The judge had been very specific about that exception. Sarah connected Leo's laptop to the projection system. The first slide appeared: Ridgeline Build and Supply, a pattern of systematic fraud. "This is ridiculous," Grant shouted. I clicked to the next slide, the video still from Mrs. Ortiz's camera, Grant's hand connecting with my face. "This is your CEO's approach to problem solving." Then came the financial slides: the ghost employees, the phantom LLC, the materials testing results. Each slide was another nail, hammered home with federal documentation. "These are lies," Grant insisted. But his investors were leaning forward, reading the federal case numbers on each document. I clicked to Leo's visualization. The pattern was undeniable, the corruption clear as a blueprint. Every project, every claim, every violation, it's all connected. The room erupted, investors shouting questions, phones ringing, one man already heading for the door. Grant grabbed the microphone. "You vindictive little, you're destroying everything I built." "No," I said calmly. "You did that yourself. You just didn't know everyone was watching." The Attorney General's representative stood up. "Mr. Caro, we'll need you to surrender your passport. Federal charges will be filed Monday." Mrs. Ortiz entered then. I'd texted her when to arrive. She walked directly to Grant and handed him an envelope. "Insurance fraud charges, 23 counts. My former colleagues at Federated Mutual send their regards." Grant's biggest investor, a silver-haired man named Davidson, stood up. I motioned for immediate removal of Grant Caro as CEO and a full forensic audit of all company assets. "Seconded," called 3 voices simultaneously. Grant looked around wildly, finally focusing on someone in the corner: my mother, who'd slipped in quietly during my presentation. "Elaine, tell them—" I vote yes, she said quietly. My community property share gives me 15%. I vote to remove you. The vote was unanimous, minus Grant's own shares. Security escorted him out while he was still screaming about conspiracies and betrayal. The shareholders immediately voted to cooperate fully with all investigations. As we left, Cade was already typing on his phone. CEO removed as federal charges loom, would be the headline. The photo would be Grant being escorted out by security, his empire collapsing behind him. You did it, Leo said when we got home. We did it, I corrected. Your database visualization was the killing blow. Mom sat down heavily, processing everything. What happens now? Now Grant faces justice, real justice, in federal court, where his connections can't save him. Mrs. Ortiz waved from her porch. Her camera's still recording. She gave me a thumbs up. The foundation of Grant's empire hadn't just cracked. It had crumbled entirely, and everyone had watched it fall. The congressional hearing room was smaller than I'd imagined, but twice as intimidating. Wood paneling, flags, and a raised platform where 5 representatives from the House Infrastructure Subcommittee sat reviewing documents. C-SPAN cameras recorded everything. The gallery was packed, journalists, investigators, and in the back row, Grant Caro with his legal team. He'd fought the subpoena, of course, but when federal infrastructure funds are involved, Congress wants answers. Miss Ellison, the committee chair began. You've provided extensive documentation regarding Ridgeline build and supplies practices. Please tell us what you witnessed. I leaned into the microphone. Systematic fraud designed to maximize profit while endangering public safety. My voice was steady, clear. Years of presenting cases at Haven Point had prepared me for this moment. That's a serious allegation, the chair noted. I have evidence. Sarah handed out bound copies of our documentation to each committee member. Page 3 shows the parallel bookkeeping system. Page 12 documents the ghost employees. Page 27 details the materials substitution on the Riverside Bridge project. Grant shifted in his seat. His lead attorney whispered urgently in his ear. Mr. Caro will have his opportunity to respond. The chair said, Please continue, Miss Ellison. I walked them through it methodically. The invoice patterns Leo had discovered. The insurance fraud Mrs. Ortiz had uncovered. The safety violations that could have killed people. May I show a video? I asked. The lights dimmed. On the screen appeared Mrs. Ortiz's footage. Not just the assault, but the audio enhanced by forensic specialists. Grant's voice boomed through the speakers. You think anyone cares about proper concrete mix? About rebar spacing? I've got the whole city council in my pocket. We build how we want. The committee members exchanged glances. One representative from Texas leaned forward. Mr. Caro, would you care to explain that statement? Grant stood up, his expensive suit not hiding the weight he'd lost since his removal as CEO. That video was taken without my consent. This is a personal vendetta by a disgruntled family member. Who happens to have federal documentation supporting every claim? The chair interrupted. Mr. Caro, did you or did you not use substandard materials on federally funded infrastructure projects? I plead the fifth. Did you maintain fraudulent payroll records? Fifth. Did you file false insurance claims? Fifth. The Texas representative shook his head. Miss Ellison, in your opinion, how widespread is this problem? Ridgeline wasn't operating in a vacuum, I said carefully. They had collaborators, inspectors who signed off on violations, city officials who fast-tracked permits, the supervisor who approved every suspicious bid. He's received over $200,000 in consulting fees from that phantom LLC. Gasps from the gallery. Cade was typing furiously, already composing his next story. We'll need names, the chair said. They're in Appendix C. Grant's attorney stood up. My client has rights. Your client defrauded taxpayers of millions. Another representative cut in. He built unsafe infrastructure that could have collapsed and killed people. His rights don't supersede public safety. The chair called for a break. In the hallway, Mrs. Ortiz appeared with a small army of former Ridgeline employees, whistleblowers who'd been too scared to speak up before. "They're ready to testify," she told me. "Every safety corner cut, every cash payment, every threat to stay quiet." When the hearing resumed, witness after witness took the stand. A foreman who'd been fired for refusing to use expired concrete, an accountant who'd questioned the double books, a safety inspector who'd been pressured to pass failing structures. Grant watched his empire's sins laid bare on national television, his jaw clenched tighter with each testimony. Finally, they called him back. "Mr. Caro," the chair said, "you have one more opportunity to address these allegations." Grant stood, gripping the podium. For a moment, the old arrogance flickered. "This is what happens when you build something successful in America. Jealous people tear you down. My stepdaughter couldn't handle discipline." "You mean assault," I said clearly into my microphone. "On camera. And now she's destroying a company that employed hundreds, with fraudulent practices that endangered thousands," the Texas representative added. Grant's composure finally shattered. "You don't understand how business works. Everyone does this. The whole system." "So you admit to systemic fraud?" the chair asked. Grant's lawyer grabbed his arm, but it was too late. The admission was on record, on camera, on C-SPAN. "I built this company from nothing," Grant shouted. "I made people rich. I kept this economy moving. So what if I cut a few corners? So what if bridges collapse?" I stood up, my voice cutting through his rant. "So what if schools fall down? So what if people die? You didn't build anything, Grant. You stole. From taxpayers, from workers, from everyone who trusted you." The room went silent. Grant stared at me, his face purple with rage. Then, quietly, Mom stood up in the gallery. "I have something to add," she said. The chair nodded. "Please approach." Mom walked forward, pulling a key from her purse. "This opens a safety deposit box at Maple Ridge First National. Grant doesn't know I have a copy. Inside are the real books, the ones he kept at home, the ones that show everything, every bribe, every kickback, every crime." She placed the key on the desk. Box 447. Grant lunged forward, but security restrained him. "You betraying—" "No," Mom said firmly. "I'm protecting my children, both of them. Something I should have done long ago." The chair took the key. "This hearing is adjourned pending review of new evidence. Mr. Caro, you're remanded to federal custody pending trial." As marshals led Grant away, he turned back one last time. "You destroyed everything." "No," I said, meeting his eyes. "You did. We just made sure everyone was watching." The cameras captured it all. Grant Caro, the untouchable contractor with City Hall connections, led away in handcuffs while his empire burned behind him. Outside, Cade already had his headline ready. "Congressional hearing exposes decades of infrastructure fraud. CEO arrested as family testifies." Mrs. Ortiz stood with Mom and Leo, her phone recording Grant being loaded into the federal transport van. "He never realized," she said quietly, "that in the age of cameras and accountability, someone is always watching." The federal courthouse in North Cascadia was packed for the sentencing. 6 months had passed since the congressional hearing. 6 months of investigations, depositions, and Grant's increasingly desperate attempts to salvage something from the wreckage. He'd tried everything: plea bargains, turning state's evidence against his co-conspirators, even a last-minute claim of mental incompetence. Nothing worked. The evidence was too overwhelming, the trail too clear. I sat in the front row with Mom and Leo. Behind us, Mrs. Ortiz had brought half the neighborhood. Cade Willis was in the press section, laptop ready. The prosecutors had asked me to give a victim impact statement, but I'd declined. The evidence spoke louder than any words I could offer. "Will the defendant please rise?" Judge Martinez commanded. Grant stood, his orange jumpsuit a far cry from his designer suits. The arrogance was gone, replaced by something hollow. "Grant Caro, You have been found guilty on 47 counts of federal fraud, 18 counts of tax evasion, 23 counts of insurance fraud, conspiracy to defraud the United States government, and aggravated assault. The scope of your crimes is staggering. You didn't just steal money. You endangered lives with substandard infrastructure. You corrupted public officials. You betrayed every trust placed in you. Grant's lawyer started to speak, but the judge raised his hand. I've read your client's statement. He claims he was simply playing by the rules everyone else follows. But Mr. Caro, you didn't follow rules. You broke them systematically, brazenly, and without regard for consequences. The judge turned to the gallery. The Riverside Bridge has been condemned. It will cost taxpayers $15 million to demolish and rebuild. 3 schools built by Ridgeline have structural damage. A parking garage collapsed last month, thankfully empty, but it could have been a tragedy. He looked back at Grant. You are hereby sentenced to 25 years in federal prison, forfeiture of all assets obtained through criminal enterprise, and restitution of $37 million to be paid to victims. Grant collapsed into his chair. His attorney whispered about appeals, but everyone knew it was over. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed. I guided Mom and Leo through them, offering no comment. We'd said everything that needed saying in court, under oath, with evidence. Wait, Leo called out. He turned to face the cameras. I want to say something. The reporters quieted. My name is Leo Chen Ellison, he said clearly. Grant Caro tried to control our family through fear and intimidation, but my sister taught me something important. Bullies only have power in the shadows. When you shine a light on them, when you document their actions, when you refuse to be silent, they crumble. He held up his acceptance letter. I'm starting at MIT this fall. Full scholarship in computer science. I'm going to build systems that expose corruption, that protect whistleblowers, that make sure people like Grant Caro can never operate in darkness again. The crowd actually applauded. Mom pulled both of us close. 3 weeks later, we held a quiet celebration at the house, our house now. Since Mom had been awarded it in the asset forfeiture, Grant's name had been scrubbed from every document, every deed, every trace of ownership. Mrs. Ortiz brought a cake decorated with a camera design. To watching out for each other, she toasted. Cade stopped by with a copy of his book proposal. It's going to be called The Foundation Cracks: How One Family Exposed America's Infrastructure Fraud. You all get first edition copies, obviously. Sarah Hendricks raised her glass. To justice served properly, through documentation, determination, and the democratic process. To Mom, Leo added, for finally choosing her children over her fear. Mom's eyes welled up. To second chances. To making sure there's always someone watching, I concluded. Later that evening, I stood on the back porch where it had all started, the spot where I'd stood between Grant and Leo, where I'd taken the blow meant for my brother, where the cameras had captured the moment that changed everything. Leo joined me. Do you regret any of it? No, I said without hesitation. Grant thought he could operate without consequences because he'd always gotten away with it before. He counted on shame, on family silence, on the shadows. But he didn't count on you. He didn't count on any of us. You with your data analysis, Mom with her hidden key, Mrs. Ortiz with her cameras, Cade with his journalism, Sarah with her legal expertise. It took all of us. Leo smiled. He didn't know who was watching. No, I agreed, looking at Mrs. Ortiz's cameras still standing sentinel, at the community that had rallied when we needed them most. He never did. The sunset painted the sky orange and pink, a new day ending with the promise of tomorrow. Grant's empire was gone, but we were still standing, stronger, united, watched over and watching out. In federal prison, Grant Caro would have 25 years to think about the moment he raised his hand to strike. 25 years to understand that in the end, it wasn't the FBI or Congress or the courts that brought him down. It was a sister protecting her brother, a mother choosing her children, and a community that refused to look away. Justice isn't always swift, but when it comes, when everyone is watching, it's thorough. The house at the end of Sycamore Drive stands peaceful now. No more angry voices, no more fear, just a family rebuilt from truth, and the quiet certainty that some things, love, justice, and the courage to stand up, are stronger than any empire built on lies. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I'd love to know where you're listening from. Drop a comment below and let's connect. If this story resonated with you, please subscribe to the channel and share your thoughts. What would you have done in Mara's situation? Your stories and perspectives make this community special. Until next time, keep watching out for each other.